From your throne to my belly, living water flow from you to me. You're welcome to the third and final episode of the series tagged Water from the Rock. Water from the Rock. The first episode we looked at we talked about the Israelites' experience at Rephidim in Exodus chapter 17, where they were thirsty, they were afraid of dying, and then they doubted God's ability to save them. So they murmured against Moses and against God. But God, in His mercy and His graciousness, He still provided water for them from the rock. From the rock. Then, to the second episode, we looked at the story of Jesus and the Samaritan woman. And they met at Jacob's well in a city called Sychar. And we saw how that the woman, out of frustration and brokenness, Jesus explained to her how that coming to this well will not solve her problem. It will not satisfy the deep thirst of her soul. That only the living water which Jesus offers, He Himself, was the solution to a deep and earnest thirst. So today we are going to be looking at the last episode of this series, and I've tagged it the Jerusalem Experience. The Jerusalem Experience. And this can be found in the book of John chapter 7 verse 37 to 39. John chapter 7 verse 37 to 39. I'll quickly read the passage to us. On the last day of the feast, the great day, Jesus stood up and cried out, "If anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink. And whoever believes in me, as the scripture has said, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water." Now this is said about the Spirit whom those who believed in Him were to receive, for as yet the Spirit has not been given because Jesus was not yet glorified. The title of the third and final episode of the Water from the Rock is the Jerusalem Experience. The Jerusalem Experience. Now this time was the period of the celebration of the Feast of Tabernacle, and this usually took them 7 days stretch to celebrate. This celebration, this feast, was done in remembrance of what God did for the Israelites when they left Egypt and while they were in the wilderness. Now this feast was celebrated in Jerusalem, and the people would have to live in small booths made of branches to remind them of God's faithfulness, His preservation, and His provision for them, even while they were in the wilderness. So every morning during the feast, the priest would draw water from the pool of Siloam, bring it to the temple, and pour it to various directions around the altar. And this symbolizes two things. One, it's a remembrance of how God supplied the needs of the people while they were in the wilderness, how God provided water for them from the rock. And it's also a way of praying to God for the latter rain, praying to God for newness, praying to God for His deliverance and salvation. So while the priests were doing this, the people, in reverence to God and in sober reflection, in prayers, they carefully watch and trusting that God would accept their offering, God would hear their prayers, and He will send revival, He will send healing, He will send deliverance, He will send salvation to them. So it was in the midst of this, and on the last day of this celebration, that Jesus stood up and He cried out, "If anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink. Jesus was indirectly telling them that this whole celebration of a thing, this celebration, this feast, these prayers for deliverance, for salvation, all that you have been hoping for is actually fulfilled in me. And so, if you believe, come to me and drink of me, because I am that water that gives life, that water that gives life, that water that brings healing, that water that brings restoration. I am he. Just like he told the woman at the well. Say, I am he, the Messiah you have been waiting for. So when we look back at Ezekiel chapter 47, we would see that Ezekiel had actually seen this revelation beforehand. He was taken in the spirit to the temple where he saw waters flowing from the temple to every part of the city. And then as he was being taken in the water, the water was ankle deep, and then it got to a point where it was knee deep, then it was waist deep, and then the water overflowed him. He could no longer walk in the water, only to swim in. So wherever the water flowed to in that vision, it was bringing life. Every dead tree was brought back to life. They were producing fruits in their numbers. In fact, that chapter told us that the Dead Sea was brought back to life. The fishes, every creature that was meant for food in the water that was dead, everything was brought back to life. Fishermen could now go back to the sea and fish again. There was joy everywhere. There was healing trees. The leaves were bringing healing to people. Crops were doing well. There was revival and restoration in the city. And so this is what the Jews were longing for whenever they come together for the feast of the tabernacle. They pray to God that this that we have seen, let it come to pass. Let our crops do well again. Let there be peace in our land again. Let there be restoration. Let there be salvation. Let there be healing. And it was right there at the moment of their deep longing that Jesus stood up and told them, listen everybody, what you are crying for is actually here. You see, it was somehow difficult for them to believe. When we go back to the previous verses in John chapter 7, around 15 downward, we would see that the people were finding it difficult to believe Jesus. Why? Because they knew his origin. They knew where he was born, when he was born, to whom he was given birth to. They knew his parents. They knew his background, his city. And so they were finding it difficult to believe that the Messiah they were waiting for was Jesus. It doesn't look like it. To them, they were expecting that the Messiah would come from an unknown place. It would just appear mightily with signs unimaginable. Even though what Jesus was doing were also unimaginable, but they couldn't just connect the miracles, the signs with his background. It was too simple to be the Messiah they were expecting. But Jesus said, if anyone tests, So Jesus knows that life will leave us thirsty for salvation, thirsty for peace, thirsty for deliverance, thirsty for breakthrough, thirsty for love, thirsty for meaning, for identity, for many things. But the first step to getting satisfied is thirst. If you are not thirsty, no amount of water will do you good. See, many people still deny the fact that they are thirsty, and so they go about chasing things that do not satisfy, and they end up frustrated and discouraged. So he said, let him come to me. Are you thirsty? Then you've got to come to Jesus. The answer to your thirst is not more achievement. It's not more effort. It's not more prayers and fasting, jumping from one mountain to the other. is simply coming to Jesus. You need to come to the end of yourself before God can help you. If you are still striving with your own strength, with your energy, with your wisdom, God will just stay back and watch. Since you've got all the power to help yourself. But Jesus is saying, come to me. Come to me. You've got to believe Jesus. You've got to trust him. And you've got to surrender all to him. Without this, your test will persist. So he said, whoever believes in me, as the scripture has said, out of his belly shall flow rivers of living water. So when we receive Jesus into our lives, we don't just get filled. We get filled, we overflow, and we become a channel. We become a fountain of this living water to other people around us. The plan is not just for us to be satisfied, but to also become the source of satisfaction for others around us. So, tests still show up today as frustration, confusion, failures, loneliness, restlessness. But Jesus invites us today to come. Come. He's saying to you and I, come. Are you still trying to quench your thirst at broken places, maybe social media, achievements, some kind of prophets that perform some gymnastics around? Remember, only Jesus satisfies. Only Jesus satisfies. So run to Jesus. It will not cost you anything. If you have believed in him already, then I can assure you that you have the Spirit in you, and it's going to flow from you to others. Harness this living water that is in you. It is my prayer for you that even as you admit your test and you come to Jesus, may he fill you to the brim. May he cause this living water to overflow in you. May he cause this living water to flow in and through you to everyone around you, bringing joy, peace, hope, even to everyone that surrounds you. So this comes to the end of the series, Water from the Rock. We've seen how that God provides, Jesus saves, and the Spirit fills us to the brim. So, come to Jesus, drink of him, and let this living water flow through you to the world.